A single dad pulls over to help with a flat tire, unaware that the woman in designer heels and a wool coat is the runaway heiress of a global fashion empire hiding from the spotlight. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind cut sharp across the back road, howling low like it had a secret to keep. Snow drifted lazily through the air, piling on the shoulders of the two-lane highway that twisted through the woods just outside of Alder Creek. Daniel Hayes squinted through the windshield of his rust-flecked truck, his breath fogging faintly in the cab. He was already late, the garage opening without him for the third time this month, but as his headlights swept around the bend, something made him ease off the gas. A white SUV sat cockeyed on the icy shoulder, hazard lights blinking in steady rhythm. One rear tire sagged pitifully, nearly flat to the rim, and beside it, pacing the snow-packed gravel in what looked like designer boots completely unsuited for winter, was a woman. She looked up as he slowed, her dark hair pulled back in a high ponytail, her arms folded tightly against a sleek gray coat that probably cost more than his mortgage. Daniel pulled over without thinking. Emily's mittened drawing still fluttered from the passenger visor, a crooked heart with "I love you, Dad" scrawled in red crayon. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Just a few minutes," he muttered, then stepped out into the cold. "Need some help?" he called. The woman turned, startled. Her expression flickered between suspicion and relief before settling on something guarded. "Flat tire, and I can't get a signal. Of course." Daniel crouched next to the tire, inspecting the damage. "Well, it's good you stopped. Driving on this any further would have torn up your rim." She offered a tight smile, breath curling in the frigid air. "Lucky me." He chuckled quietly. "Something like that." There was a pause. She looked around at the snow-dusted trees and the empty stretch of road. "Do you always stop for strangers?" Daniel shrugged as he grabbed his tools from the back of the truck. "Not always, but something told me you weren't exactly from around here." She laughed just once, a sound that surprised even her. "That obvious?" He gave her a half-smile as he knelt by the tire. "Just a little." She stood quietly, watching him work. Neither of them knew it yet, but this frozen roadside would mark the end of one story and the very beginning of another. The cold had a way of creeping through even the most expensive fabrics. Ava Sinclair tugged her wool coat tighter around her frame, but it didn't help much. The wind nipped at her cheeks and sent shivers crawling down her back. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her heels sinking deeper into the snow with every step. Red-bottomed Louboutins were not made for back roads in the middle of nowhere, and certainly not for standing beside a dead SUV with a flat tire and zero reception. She glanced at her phone again. Black screen, still dead. She'd meant to charge it last night, but in her rush to leave the city behind, really leave, it had slipped her mind. Another brilliant move in a growing list of them. Ava exhaled through her nose, watching the white puff of breath dissolve into the frozen air. Her SUV, shiny and spotless just hours ago, now looked defeated. Snow clung to its fenders, and one rear tire slumped like it had given up trying to impress anyone. She bit her lip and looked down the road. Empty. No headlights, no help, just pines and gray sky and the biting whisper of wind through the trees. She hated the silence, hated how loud it felt. In Manhattan, noise was a constant companion. Horns, footsteps, conversations bleeding out of cafes and taxis. But here? The quiet pressed in on her like a weight, and it made her feel exposed, raw, like the cold could see straight through her polished exterior and into the pieces she was trying so hard to keep together. A snap of twigs made her head turn, not an animal, a truck, coming around the curve, rusted, older model, and slowing down. A man stepped out, flannel jacket, worn jeans, boots dusted with salt and snow. His face was unshaven, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes was steady. Need some help? He asked. Ava hesitated. Pride battled instinct. But as another gust of wind hit her full on, she nodded. Yeah, she said quietly. Looks like I do. And just like that, the silence cracked, not with noise, but with something warmer, unexpected, real. Daniel knelt beside the SUV, breath steady in the cold as he loosened the lug nuts with practiced ease. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that felt permanent. His fingers, though calloused and worn, moved with care, methodical, deliberate. Not a word of complaint, not a muttered curse, just quiet focus. Ava stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly against her chest, watching him. She should have been cold, she was cold, but something about the way he moved kept her still. There was nothing showy in what he did, no flourish or self-importance, just a man doing what needed to be done, and doing it well. In Manhattan, no one helped without an angle. People were too busy, too distracted, too guarded. If you broke a heel or lost your phone, you dealt with it, or you paid someone else to deal with it. But here, this stranger hadn't even hesitated. He'd pulled over, gotten out, and started working like it was the most natural thing in the world. She watched as he stood to stretch his back, then wiped his hands on an old rag tucked into his jacket pocket. His movements were simple, but there was a quiet strength in them, an ease that didn't come from wealth or prestige, but from years of repetition, of doing for others without needing applause. "You do this a lot?" she asked, her voice tentative. Daniel looked up at her, a flicker of a smile on his face. "Changing tires? Or stopping for stranded people in designer coats?" Ava's lips twitched, despite herself. "Both, I guess." "Not really, but figured you could use a hand." There was no flirtation in his tone, no sarcasm, just truth. She studied his face, the soft lines around his eyes, the smudge of grease near his wrist. In another life, in her life, someone like Daniel wouldn't even register at a gala or board meeting. But here, out in the cold, miles away from expectations and headlines, he felt more real than anyone she'd met in years. And as the new tire clicked into place and the jack lowered the SUV gently back to the ground, Ava realized he wasn't just fixing her car. He was unraveling something in her she didn't even know was broken. Ava reached into her purse the moment the tire hit the ground, her gloved fingers brushing past a sleek card holder and finding the soft leather of her wallet. It was instinct, muscle memory, really. You pay people for their time, for service, for kindness. That's how the world worked, at least in hers. "Let me give you something," she said, pulling out a crisp 100 and holding it out to him. Daniel was already packing up his tools, sliding the jack back into his truck bed like it weighed nothing. At the sound of her voice, he glanced over his shoulder, saw the bill in her hand, and gave a short shake of his head. "No need," he said simply. Ava blinked. "I insist. You just saved me from waiting in the cold for hours." "I didn't do it for money." Her hand hovered in the air, unsure what to do with itself now. The bill fluttered slightly in the breeze. "Still, it's just... I appreciate it." Daniel turned to face her fully, leaning slightly against the tailgate of his truck. "Then pay it forward. Help somebody else next time." His tone wasn't cold, just final. Matter of fact. The way someone might talk about tightening a bolt or filling a gas tank, like kindness wasn't a favor, just the way things ought to be. Ava lowered her hand slowly, tucking the money back into her wallet. She wasn't used to refusals, not like this. In her world, generosity often came with conditions, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, favors quietly tallied. But Daniel seemed immune to all that. "You have a daughter?" she asked, catching sight of the child's drawing still pinned to the visor in his truck. Daniel glanced at it, and something in his face softened. "Yeah, Emily, 7 going on 17. Ava smiled. "She's lucky." He shrugged. "She's my whole world. That's why I need to get moving, actually. Gotta get her from school soon." The quiet urgency in his voice told her more than she expected. Time mattered. Gas mileage mattered. And probably every dollar, but still he hadn't taken hers. As he climbed into his truck and started the engine, Ava stood by her now drivable SUV, watching the taillights glow faintly in the snowy haze. For the first time in a long while, she felt something strange twist in her chest. Gratitude, and maybe guilt. Not because he refused her money, but because no one had ever told her that decency didn't come with a price tag. By the time Ava turned off the main road and onto the snow-packed gravel path leading to the cabin, the light had begun to fade. The trees crowded close, tall pines dusted in white, their branches heavy with silence. Her SUV moved cautiously, tires crunching softly beneath her. No traffic, no horns, no paparazzi lurking behind tinted windows. Just snow and the low hum of the heater. She exhaled slowly, realizing only then how tightly she'd been holding herself together. The cabin appeared around the final bend, modest, two-story, wood-paneled, with a sloped roof and a front porch buried in snow. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, a detail arranged by the rental service to make sure it looked lived in when she arrived. It was the opposite of every Manhattan penthouse she'd ever been in. No marble floors, no glass elevators, no curated furniture collections, just wood, stone, and quiet. Ava stepped out of the SUV and wrapped her coat tighter. Her Louboutins had finally been retired to the passenger seat, replaced by practical snow boots she'd reluctantly purchased at a roadside gas station hours earlier. She climbed the porch steps and unlocked the front door, her fingers stiff from the cold. Inside, the cabin was warm, simple. A fireplace flickered in the corner, fed by an automatic timer. The air smelled faintly of pine, and something baked into the walls. Cedar, maybe. She dropped her keys into a ceramic bowl on a worn oak table and looked around. There was no sound except for the faint crackle of firewood and the settling creaks of the old structure. No buzz of her phone. She hadn't turned it back on yet. No texts from her mother, no missed calls from the Sinclair Corporation's board of directors. No pressure to smile, to pose, to be the image she'd been groomed to maintain since she was 16. Ava sank into the overstuffed armchair near the hearth and stared into the flames. She should have felt restless, but instead, a strange stillness settled into her bones. For the first time in years, she wasn't being watched, judged, measured. Here she was no one, just a woman in hiding, just Ava, and that felt like a beginning. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled with a soft chime as Daniel stepped into the warm, cinnamon-scented air. The place was small, cozy really, with mismatched chairs, foggy windows, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in years. Locals called it the Brew Barn, even though it hadn't been a barn in decades. The name just stuck. Daniel stomped the snow from his boots and gave a polite nod to Ellie behind the counter. "Just the usual," he said. Ellie, already pouring his black coffee, grinned. "Thought you might show up. Cold enough to freeze your eyebrows off out there." He smirked and rubbed his gloved hands together. "Just about." He moved to his usual table by the window until he saw her. Ava. She sat tucked in the corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes fixed on something just beyond the frosted glass. No makeup today. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, and she wore a gray cable-knit sweater that looked like it came from anywhere but a Manhattan boutique. Still, something about her posture gave her away. Not just the expensive cut of her coat, draped on the seat beside her. It was in the way she sat, shoulders a little too straight, jaw held just a bit too tight. She was trying to blend in, but it wasn't working. No one else seemed to notice her. Most of the locals were too busy chatting about snowplow delays and high school basketball scores. But Daniel noticed. She looked out of place, and completely alone. Ava turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the register, and caught him watching. Their eyes met. For a moment neither looked away. Then she offered a soft, hesitant smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, like she wasn't sure if he'd recognize her, or maybe wasn't sure if she wanted him to. Daniel gave a small nod in return. Nothing more. Just acknowledgement. A thread between two strangers who shared something that wasn't quite a connection, but also wasn't nothing. He took his coffee and sat a few tables away, facing the window, but feeling her presence like a quiet echo in the room. Neither of them spoke, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. Daniel didn't mean to linger. He never did. Mornings at the brew barn were usually quick. Coffee, a few pleasantries, then off to the garage. But something about today felt slower. Or maybe it was just her. Ava was still seated in the corner, steam rising from her mug in soft spirals. She glanced up when he passed by to refill his cup, her lips parting slightly, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. "Mind if I join you?" he asked before he could talk himself out of it. Her expression shifted, surprised, then cautious, then something gentler. "Sure," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Unless this is your spot." Daniel sat down with a small grin. "It usually is, but I think I'll survive the change." They sat in silence for a beat, the clatter of cups and the low hum of conversation filling the space between them. Then she extended her hand. "I'm Ava. Ava Collins." Daniel didn't flinch at the fake last name. She'd chosen it the night before, practicing it out loud in the quiet cabin until it felt natural enough to pass. Collins was clean, untraceable, the opposite of Sinclair. "Daniel Hayes," he replied, shaking her hand. "So, Ava Collins, what brings you to Alder Creek? Not exactly a popular vacation spot this time of year." Ava laughed lightly. "I needed a break, somewhere quiet, somewhere without traffic and sirens." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "City girl?" "Something like that," she said, stirring her coffee, even though there was nothing in it. "Just figured it was time to breathe for a while." He nodded. "Yeah, this town'll do that to you, whether you want it or not." She smiled into her mug. "So, Daniel Hayes, what do you do when you're not rescuing stranded women from flat tires?" He chuckled. "Fix cars. Try to keep up with my daughter. Fix more cars." "How old is she?" 7. Her name's Emily. Smart, stubborn. She's the best thing I've ever done." Ava looked at him then, really looked. Not at the flannel shirt or the grease under his nails, but at the quiet pride in his voice. She liked it, the realness of it all. And Daniel, sipping his coffee across from her, still had no idea he was sharing small talk with one of the most photographed women in New York. And Ava liked that, too. The Alder Creek Library was a small, sunlit building tucked between the bakery and the post office. Its windows fogged slightly from the heat inside, battling the chill of early afternoon. Daniel had dropped Emily off for story hour while he ran errands, trusting the warmth of Miss Carla, the town's ever-patient librarian, and the rows of worn children's books to keep her occupied. Emily darted between shelves, her puffy purple coat half-zipped, and her mittens trailing from her sleeves like wings. She was looking for the next book in the Princess of the Wildwood series, a story about a brave girl who could speak to wolves and wore a crown made of stars. She had just turned the corner of the fantasy section when she saw someone sitting cross-legged on the carpeted floor, flipping through a thick hardcover with gold-embossed lettering. "Hi," Emily said, not shy in the slightest. The woman looked up, startled at first. Then she smiled, warm and a little crooked. "Hi there." Emily peered at the book in her lap. "Do you like fairy tales, too?" Ava laughed softly. "I do, especially the ones where the girl saves herself." Emily nodded, approving. "My favorite princess lives in the forest and fights dragons." "She sounds like someone I'd want to be friends with," Ava said, closing the book gently. "I'm Emily," she announced. "What's your name?" "Ava," she replied, sticking to her story. "Just Ava." Emily plopped down beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You can help me find my book, if you want." And so they did. For the next 20 minutes, Ava followed the whirlwind that was Emily Hayes through the aisles, listening to her chatter about magical creatures, school lunches, and how her dad made the best pancakes when he wasn't too tired. Ava didn't say much, but she didn't need to. She listened like she meant it, and that was more than enough. As they sat on the reading rug flipping through illustrated pages, Daniel walked in. He froze for a heartbeat at the sight. His daughter curled up beside Ava, both of them laughing quietly over a story about a talking tree and a very lost prince. He didn't say anything at first, just watched. And something in his chest shifted. He hadn't realized how much lighter the room felt with her in it. The late afternoon sun filtered through the library's high windows, casting long golden stripes across the worn carpet. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching as Emily animatedly pointed to a page in the book she and Ava were reading. Her little finger traced the image of a flying fox in a wizard's hat, and Ava, knees bent, boots kicked off beside her, laughed with the kind of ease that made Daniel's brow crease in surprise. She wasn't just humoring Emily, she was enjoying herself. "Dad?" Emily spotted him and sprang up, book in hand. "Ava helped me find the forest princess and the sea spell. She even did all the voices." Ava stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from her sweater, a flicker of hesitation returning to her expression now that they weren't tucked in between shelves. Daniel gave a polite nod. "Sounds like I owe you a thank you." "No need," Ava replied, her voice calm but softer now. "She's a good kid." Emily, oblivious to any awkwardness, bounced on her toes. "Dad, can Ava come over for dinner, please? You said we could have someone over this week." Ava blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I don't want to impose." Daniel met her eyes, something cautious but open behind his. "We're just doing spaghetti, nothing fancy, and Emily's a very persistent host." Ava glanced down at the little girl whose hopeful grin could probably break down stronger defenses than hers. Something inside her shifted. A dinner invitation shouldn't have felt so strange, so big, and yet it did. No PR team, no photographers, no wine pairings or crystal chandeliers, just a meal, a family, a real table. And God, she missed that. "I'd like that," Ava said finally, her voice barely above the quiet around them. Emily squealed, immediately launching into dinner planning as they walked toward the door. What color napkins they should use, paper, probably. Whether there would be dessert, ice cream, if the freezer wasn't acting up, and if Ava liked garlic bread, who didn't. Ava followed, listening, smiling. She had no idea what she'd just agreed to, but she was already looking forward to it. The scent of simmering garlic and tomato filled the Hayes kitchen, clinging to the worn cabinets and old checkered curtains like a comforting memory. Ava stood awkwardly by the counter, unsure if she should offer to help or just stay out of the way. Daniel moved confidently through the narrow space, stirring the pot with one hand while balancing a garlic bread tray on the other. It wasn't graceful, but it worked. Emily sat at the table, crayons scattered beside her plate, as she colored a dragon wearing a chef's hat. "Dad always burns the edges," she warned Ava with a mischievous grin. "But we eat it anyway." Daniel shot her a playful look. "It's called crispy. Thank you very much." Ava laughed genuinely, and something in her loosened. She wasn't used to this kind of dinner. There was no wine being decanted, no clink of silver against porcelain, no hired chef offering amuse-bouches, just a small, slightly crooked table, 3 mismatched plates, and a sense of ease that felt almost foreign. They sat down, passing the bowl of spaghetti and the basket of slightly too toasted garlic bread. Emily talked nonstop, about books, about the funny sound the heater made last night, about how her class was learning to spell words like adventure and unicorn. Daniel listened, interjecting with the occasional dad joke that made Ava smile more than she meant to. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't fill silences with noise. He just was, present, unfiltered, and it caught her off guard. "This is really good," Ava said, twirling her fork through the noodles. Daniel grinned. "Family recipe." Emily leaned in. "From a box." Ava laughed again, unable to stop. Her shoulders, usually tense with expectation and image, had somehow relaxed. The chaos, Emily's chatter, the scuffed floors, the sticky spot on the table from a long-forgotten juice box, it was all so real, so unlike anything she'd ever known growing up in penthouse silence. After dinner, they cleared the table together. No one told her to help, but she did anyway, rinsing dishes while Emily dried with a towel half her size. As Daniel loaded the last plate into the dishwasher, he looked over at Ava. "Thanks for coming." She met his eyes, a little surprised by how much she meant it when she replied, "Thanks for having me." It wasn't the food, it was the feeling. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a guest. She felt home. The house had gone quiet. Emily was tucked into bed, her breathing soft and steady behind the cracked door down the hall. The kitchen lights were off, save for the faint glow above the stove, casting golden shadows across the chipped countertops and the drying dish rack. Daniel stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the snow, drifting past the porch light. He could still hear Ava's laugh in the back of his mind. The way she'd tried and failed, not to giggle when Emily declared the spaghetti a masterpiece, but not like Picasso. She had leaned into the moment, not above it. No pretending, no stiffness, just warmth. And he hadn't seen that coming. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, trying to shake the feeling that had crept into his chest somewhere between garlic bread and clearing the table. He didn't know what it was exactly, just that it had weight, a pull. Something quiet but persistent, like the hum of a motor you didn't know was running until it stopped. He barely knew her. She was new in town, just passing through. And sure, maybe she was different than he expected, softer, less polished in the ways that mattered. But she still had the air of someone built for another world, a bigger world. And when the snow thawed and the roads cleared, she'd leave this one behind. That was how it always went, wasn't it? People came and went. The ones who stayed were the ones who couldn't afford to leave or didn't want to. He leaned a shoulder against the window frame, exhaling through his nose. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. It was that he didn't trust what he was starting to feel. Not with Emily in the picture, not with the way Ava had looked at him across the table, like she saw more than just a tired single dad with a half-broken dishwasher and too many bills. He wasn't in the business of daydreams anymore. Still, as the wind curled around the corners of the house and the warmth from dinner lingered in the air, Daniel couldn't quite ignore the whisper in his gut. She might leave. But while she was here, she was waking up something in him he thought had long since gone quiet. And that scared him more than anything. The fire crackled low in the cabin hearth, throwing lazy amber light across the room. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, steady, endless. Ava sat curled on the edge of the couch, a thick wool blanket draped over her shoulders, the glow of her phone screen harsh against the dim room. She hadn't turned it on in 3 days. Now, as it powered up and the missed notifications poured in, texts, voicemails, a dozen emails marked urgent, the weight of everything she'd left behind came rushing back. For a moment, she just stared at the flood of red badges on the screen as if willing them to disappear. Then she tapped a name. Sienna, personal assistant. The phone rang once before Sienna picked up, breathless. "Ava?" "I'm okay," Ava whispered, eyes flicking toward the window as if anyone could hear. "I just needed some space." "Oh, thank God." There was a pause, followed by the soft sound of typing. "Your mother is in full crisis mode. The PR team is scrambling. She thought you'd been kidnapped or worse. Where are you?" "I can't say, not yet," Ava replied, her voice low, careful. I needed to get out, to remember who I am outside of press junkets and press releases." Sienna sighed. "I get it. Really, I do. But the board's asking questions. Investors are nervous. Your mother's talking about freezing your shares until you resurface." Ava closed her eyes, pressing her fingertips to her forehead. "Of course she is." "You're still the face of Sinclair, Ava. You can't just disappear." "I didn't disappear," Ava murmured. "I left. There's a difference." Silence stretched across the line. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like a gentle reminder of just how far she'd come. and how easily it could all be taken back. "Are you safe?" Sienna asked finally. Ava looked around the cabin, the firelight, the worn books on the shelves, the faint scent of pine and cinnamon still hanging in the air, and in her mind she saw Emily's smiling face. Daniel's quiet steadiness, the kind of peace that didn't come from wealth, but from realness. "I'm safe," she said, "but I'm not ready to come back." "You know she won't stop looking," Sienna said gently. "I know," Ava whispered. "That's what scares me." She ended the call and sat in the dark, phone face down on the coffee table, the weight of her old life pressing against the edges of her new one. And for the first time she wasn't sure which one would win. The ballroom glittered like a dream, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over the sea of black tuxedos and champagne gowns. Cameras flashed near the velvet rope entrance, catching every angle of every smile, every pose. Ava stood near the center, back straight, smile perfectly practiced. A flute of untouched champagne balanced between her fingers. Sinclair International's Winter Gala was a staple in the New York social calendar, and Ava, as always, was the centerpiece. The dress was couture, custom designed in Milan, flown in by private courier. Her hair had taken 4 hours and 3 people to arrange. Her makeup was immaculate. From the outside, she was everything they expected, the poised daughter of fashion royalty, an icon in the making. But inside, Ava couldn't breathe. She caught sight of her mother across the room, deep in conversation with 2 investors. Celeste Sinclair didn't glance at her daughter. She didn't need to. Ava knew the routine. She'd give a few interviews, laugh graciously, stand at her mother's side when the cameras came. She was a product, as carefully crafted as the seasonal campaigns they plastered on Fifth Avenue. It had been like this for as long as she could remember. Childhood had been boarding schools, etiquette tutors, red carpet rehearsals. Privacy was a myth, authenticity a luxury she'd never been allowed. Even her rebellious years had been managed, co-opted into carefully spun PR narratives. But that night, something shifted. A young reporter caught her off guard with a question, simple, almost innocent. "If you could be anywhere else right now, where would you be?" Ava hesitated. For just a second the truth bubbled to the surface, somewhere quiet, somewhere real. But her mother appeared at her side before she could answer, slipping seamlessly into the frame. "Ava would never miss this," Celeste said, her hand resting lightly on Ava's back like a warning, dressed as affection. "This is her world." And that was the moment Ava knew. It wasn't. Later that night, after the last photograph had been taken and the last speech delivered, Ava stood alone on the balcony. The city lights sparkled below her like stars someone had tried to sell. She pulled her phone from her clutch, opened a blank search bar, and typed, "Quiet cabins for rent in the mountains." She didn't pack much, just enough to disappear, and when she drove away 3 days later, no press release, no forwarded address, she didn't look back. She wasn't running from the spotlight. She was finally walking toward herself. The grocery store was nearly empty, save for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the low hum of a country song playing overhead. Daniel pushed the cart slowly down the cereal aisle while Emily skipped ahead, her mittened hands trailing along the shelves, pausing only to grab a box of the kind with the marshmallows she knew he always said no to. "Put it back, Em," he said without looking. "We're not turning breakfast into dessert." She pouted theatrically, but obeyed, placing the box back with a huff. As Daniel rounded the end cap, she darted toward the checkout, her boots squeaking on the tile. Then she stopped short. A wire magazine rack stood near the register, glossy covers catching the overhead lights, fashion spreads, tabloid rumors, celebrity faces frozen mid-smile. One in particular made Emily's head tilt. It was an older issue, slightly curled at the corners, but the woman on the front was unmistakable. Dark hair, green eyes, a silk dress that shimmered like water. "Daddy," she called, waving him over. "Look!" Daniel came around the corner, scanning for trouble, but found only Emily pointing at the magazine like it had just said something funny. "That's Ava," she said, beaming. She looks really pretty in that dress. Daniel frowned, stepping closer. The headline read, Ava Sinclair steps into the spotlight. The fashion empire's future unveiled. It hit him like a slow-moving freight train. He took the magazine from the rack, flipping it open without a word. Full-page spreads, gala photos, interviews, quotes about legacy and luxury, and the burden of expectation. There was no mistaking it. The woman sitting across from him in the library last week, the one who'd eaten spaghetti at his kitchen table and laughed at Emily's dragon jokes, was the same woman gracing these pages. Not Ava Collins, Ava Sinclair. He closed the magazine, lips pressed into a thin line. Emily tugged his sleeve, unfazed. Do you think she's really a princess like in the book? Daniel swallowed hard. I'm not sure, kiddo. But he knew one thing for certain. Ava had secrets, and she wasn't just passing through. The storm rolled in fast that evening. Gray clouds swallowing what little light remained, wind rattling tree limbs against the cabin's windows. Ava stood by the fireplace, sipping tea and watching the snow start to fall again, slow and heavy. It should have been peaceful. Instead, her chest felt tight, like the air had thickened around her. A knock at the door broke the quiet. One sharp, deliberate sound. She knew it was him before she opened it. Daniel stood on the porch, snow in his hair, jaw set. In his hands, half folded and damp at the corners, was the magazine. That magazine. Hey, she said carefully, stepping aside to let him in. He didn't move. You're Ava Sinclair, he said, voice low but steady. Ava swallowed. Yes. His eyes searched hers, hurt flashing behind the calm exterior. Emily saw this at the store, thought you were a princess. Ava let out a breath, setting her mug down on the mantel. I never told you my last name. You told me a last name, he snapped. Just not the real one. She winced. I didn't lie, Daniel. I needed to be someone else. For once. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, but the air between them stayed cold. You should have said something. And what would I have said? Hi, I'm the heiress to $1 billion fashion empire. Pass the garlic bread? You could have trusted me. Ava's voice dropped, softer now. It wasn't about trust. Not at first. I didn't come here to trick anyone. I came to disappear. For a little while. To stop being Ava Sinclair and start figuring out who I actually am. Daniel crossed his arms, staring at the floor. So all of it, dinner, the library, Emily, was just part of your little escape plan? No, she said, stepping toward him. That was real. You were real. That's what scared me the most. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, snow kept falling, brushing against the windows like a whisper. Inside, everything that had felt simple between them suddenly felt fragile, like it had always been balanced on a truth Ava hadn't dared to share. And now that it was out in the open, she wasn't sure if it could still stand. The next few days passed like smoke, there, then gone. But something had shifted. Daniel moved through his routines with mechanical precision. Open the garage at 8, check the work orders, grab lunch from the diner counter without sitting down. He still greeted people with a nod, still helped Mrs. Lambert carry her groceries, still showed up for Emily's bedtime stories. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a kind of quiet retreat that settled into his bones like the cold. He didn't call. He didn't stop by the cabin. And when Emily asked why Ava hadn't come around lately, he just said she was busy. The truth was harder to explain, especially to a child. That someone could feel so real and still not be who you thought they were. That connection could unravel with a single thread. Daniel had been burned before. He'd fallen in love once, deeply, recklessly. And when sickness took her, it took pieces of him too. Not just grief, but the soft parts. The parts that trusted easily, forgave quickly. Since then, he'd built walls, not out of bitterness, but survival. For Emily, for himself. And now here came Ava, with her quiet smile and fairy tale secrets and a life she never invited him into. He wasn't angry about her name, not really. He was angry about what it meant, that she'd lived in two worlds and only let him into one, that he'd let her into his life, into Emily's life, while she kept the door to hers locked. At night, after Emily had fallen asleep with a book sprawled across her chest, Daniel would sit at the kitchen table and stare at the empty chair across from him, the one Ava had filled just once, the one that still carried her echo. He missed her. God help him, he did. But missing someone didn't make it right, didn't make it safe, and Daniel Hayes didn't take risks like that anymore, so he stayed silent, guarded. The walls were back up, because the last time he let them down, he lost everything, and this time he wasn't sure his heart could afford the cost. The envelope sat on the cabin's worn dining table like it didn't belong there. Thick cream stock with an embossed gold seal, her family's crest pressed into the wax like a quiet command. Ava stared at it for a long time before touching it. The Sinclair Winter Gala. Of course. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. Ava Sinclair, guest of honor, the date, the venue, the time, same as every year. A glittering event at the Sinclair Tower rooftop ballroom filled with champagne flutes, press cameras, and curated perfection. The guest list was tighter than a state dinner. The stakes were always high, this time higher. Because she hadn't just disappeared, she had walked away, and now they wanted her return to be a spectacle, an orchestrated triumph, her mother's way of reclaiming the narrative, of proving that Ava was still part of the empire, no matter how far she ran. She slid the letter out anyway, eyes scanning the words she already knew by heart. Your presence is not only requested, it is expected. A driver will be sent. Expected, that was always the language, not invited, not welcomed, just expected. Ava folded the letter and set it back down. Her fingers hovered over it, almost reverent, but there was no affection in her gaze, only resignation, and the ache of something old and familiar stirring inside her. She stood slowly and moved to the window, watching the wind sweep loose snowflakes across the porch. Out here, the silence had become a kind of comfort. Out here, no one demanded she wear a mask or pose just right. No one cared about headlines, but the invitation was a reminder her escape was temporary. The world she'd left behind hadn't forgotten her, and it never would. For a moment she imagined walking into the gala in that same cable-knit sweater, boots muddy from a morning hike, hair undone, just to see the look on her mother's face. But she knew better. That world didn't bend, it swallowed, and now it wanted her back, whether she was ready or not. The fire in the cabin crackled low, casting dancing shadows on the walls as Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, her little hands carefully arranging puzzle pieces. Ava sat nearby on the couch, curled into herself, a book open on her lap that she hadn't read a word of. She watched Emily in quiet admiration, her focus, her determination, the way her brow furrowed when a piece didn't quite fit. Daniel still hadn't come by. Days had passed since the magazine, since the storm in his eyes. Ava tried not to hope every time headlights passed the cabin. "Is it true?" Emily's voice broke the silence, soft but serious. Ava blinked, startled. "What's true, sweetheart?" Emily looked up, eyes clear and unflinching, in the way only children could be. "That you're famous. That your name isn't really Ava Collins. That you were in a magazine and wore a sparkly dress." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "Did I lie to you?" Emily asked, almost in a whisper. "Because my teacher says lying breaks trust, and trust is like a balloon. If you let it go, it's hard to get back." Ava closed the book in her lap and set it aside. She moved to sit on the rug beside Emily, meeting her at eye level. "I didn't mean to lie," she said gently. "I used a different name because I needed to feel normal, just for a little while. I didn't want anyone to treat me differently." Emily fiddled with a puzzle piece, turning it in her small fingers. "But my daddy treats everyone the same." Ava smiled, pain behind her eyes. I know he does. He's one of the few people who still knows how. Are you going to leave now? The question struck deep. Ava hesitated, unsure how much truth a 7-year-old could or should handle. I don't want to, she said at last. But there are people back home who think they own my story. They're trying to pull me back, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do yet. Emily looked down at the puzzle, voice small. I hope you stay. I liked having you at dinner. Ava reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I liked it too. She meant it, more than Emily could ever know. The garage was quiet, save for the slow drip of melting snow off the metal roof and the low buzz of an old radio playing somewhere in the background. Daniel stood hunched over the hood of a Chevy with a busted alternator, but his hands weren't moving. They just rested there, palms flat against cold metal, as if the truck might speak if he stood still long enough. He hadn't heard from Ava since that night. Not that he expected to, not really. But he'd thought about her, constantly. Not the magazine version, the runway heiress with a legacy name and a lifetime of headlines. No, the version that lived in his memory was the one who sat barefoot on his kitchen stool, laughing at Emily's impersonation of a dragon, the one who stayed late helping wash dishes without being asked, the one who listened, and damn it, that was the version that hurt to think about. He'd spent so long keeping things simple. Work, Emily, bills, sleep, repeat. It was safe. It made sense. No unknown variables, no high-stakes heartbreak. But Ava had slipped past that safety without even trying, and now everything he'd worked so hard to control felt unsteady. Was any of it real? The dinners, the stories, the way she looked at him like she wasn't pretending? Or had it all been part of a break she'd needed from her glittering, unreachable world? Daniel pulled back from the truck and ran a hand through his hair, grease smudging across his temple. The air smelled of oil and steel and something else, regret maybe. He wasn't angry anymore, not really, just lost in the space between doubt and wanting to believe. Wanting to believe that someone like her could choose this life, his life. But people like Ava Sinclair didn't stay in towns like Alder Creek, not for long. Still, when he looked toward the corner of the garage, where she'd stood that day, curious, asking about parts she didn't understand, he felt it again, that ache. Like something had started to grow, just enough to be missed when it was gone. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't know how to fix it. It was just past noon when Ava pulled into the lot behind Daniel's garage, her boots crunching against the packed snow. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, and her breath misted in the air as she stepped out, heart pounding louder than the crunch of gravel beneath her. She didn't have a speech rehearsed, no grand apology, just the truth, whatever pieces of it she could carry in her hands without letting them fall. Inside, the garage door was rolled up halfway. The smell of motor oil, cold steel, and something faintly sweet, maybe the coffee Daniel always forgot to finish, hit her the second she stepped in. He was there, back turned, bent over the hood of an old station wagon. Grease smudged up his forearm. A wrench clinked against the engine block. He didn't look up. "Need a hand?" she said, her voice soft. Daniel froze for half a second before straightening. He wiped his hands on a rag, still not looking at her. "If it's your car again, I'll have to start charging you," he said, a dry edge to his voice. Ava smiled, tentative. "It's not the car." He finally turned, his eyes landing on her with the weight of someone trying not to feel too much. "Then what is it?" "I didn't come here to explain the headlines," she said. "I came to show you that I meant what I said, that the version of me you met here wasn't an act." Daniel leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. "And you're going to prove that by what? Helping me rotate tires?" Ava shrugged. "I figured I'd start somewhere." He stared at her, unreadable. Then he handed her a wrench. "All right then, let's see what you've got." She stepped forward, took the tool, and knelt beside him at the front tire. He guided her in short, quiet sentences. How to loosen the bolts, where to brace her foot. Her hands fumbled more than once, But she didn't quit. She listened. And Daniel, against his better judgment, felt the ice begin to crack. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to let her in, just a little. Enough to hope that maybe not everything broken had to stay that way. Snow fell in slow, lazy flakes outside the living room window, blanketing Alder Creek in quiet stillness. The kind of snow that muffled the world, that made even the smallest things feel sacred. Inside the Hayes house, the lights were dim and warm, casting a golden glow over the modest Christmas tree standing proudly in the corner, its ornaments a mix of paper crafts, candy canes, and mismatched hand-me-downs. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor beside Emily, helping her untangle a strand of popcorn garland. The fire crackled behind them, and the faint scent of cinnamon and pine clung to the air. Emily was humming a tune that faded in and out, something she'd learned at school, something cheerful and imperfect. It made Ava smile. Daniel stood in the kitchen, slicing apples for the pie he claimed wasn't fancy, but always turned out just right. His sleeves were rolled up, and flour dusted the edge of his jeans. He looked over once, catching Ava's eye, and for a moment everything slowed. No cameras, no velvet ropes, no expectations. Just them, just this. Emily finished the garland with a triumphant "ta-da!" and rushed over to hang it haphazardly across the front of the tree. Ava followed, gently straightening it as Emily beamed with pride. When Daniel joined them a few minutes later, pie in one hand and 3 mismatched plates in the other, Ava felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. They ate cross-legged in the living room, the pie slightly overcooked, the whipped cream melting too fast, and not a single soul in the world watching. Afterward, Emily curled up under a blanket between them, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit and mumbling sleepily through a story Ava read aloud. Daniel listened quietly, watching Ava as much as the pages. Her voice softened at just the right parts, her hand brushing Emily's hair without a second thought. She didn't look like someone visiting a world she didn't belong in it. She looked like someone who had always belonged and just forgot for a while. Later, as the house settled into silence and snow kept falling outside, Ava stood in the kitchen alone, rinsing pie plates and humming that same off-key tune Emily had sung earlier. And for the first time in years, Christmas didn't feel like a performance. It felt like peace. The morning started like the others had, quiet, slow, wrapped in the gentle rhythm of small-town life. Ava stood on Daniel's porch with a mug of coffee in her hands, watching the steam curl into the crisp winter air. Emily's giggles drifted through the open window behind her, the sound of cereal crunching and cartoons playing faint in the background. It felt like their own hidden world, untouched. Then came the sound of tires crunching gravel, different from Daniel's truck or the mail carrier's slow, familiar engine. She looked up. A sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway, followed by another. Something inside her froze, and then the doors opened. 2 men stepped out, cameras already raised, lenses clicking before their boots even touched the ground. One of them called out, "Ava, over here! Look this way!" Ava's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just one outlet. More cars appeared at the edge of the road, tires skidding slightly on the snow. More photographers, long lenses, curious eyes. She dropped the mug. It hit the porch with a dull crack and rolled into the snow. Daniel was at the door in seconds, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What the hell?" "Paparazzi," Ava said quietly, backing toward the door, her voice thin with disbelief. "They found me." Emily appeared beside Daniel, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy, why are there cameras?" "Inside," he said quickly, ushering her back. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight, shoulders locked. One of the photographers shouted again, "Is it true, Ava? Are you staying here with him? Is this your new life?" Daniel stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body, as flashbulbs lit the porch like fireworks. "Leave, now." But they didn't. They never did. Not unless forced. Ava stood behind him, stunned, her heartbeat a frantic drum. She thought she'd escaped, thought this world, this place, had been safe. But someone had sold her out, and now the walls of their quiet little bubble were shattered, the silence pierced by clicks, questions, and the cold return of the world she'd tried so hard to leave behind. It only took one shot. The photo hit the internet before Ava even had time to breathe. By that evening, it was everywhere, shared, retweeted, dissected in headlines like gossip gospel. Heiress on the run? Ava Sinclair spotted in small-town romance. In the photo, Ava was on Daniel's porch, her face half-turned, hair loose around her shoulders. Daniel stood in front of her, jaw tight, shielding her from the camera's view. And at the edge of the frame, barely visible through the screen door, was Emily. Tiny, curious, barefoot in her pajamas. The image wasn't glamorous, it wasn't posed, and that's what made it powerful. The media ate it up. Sinclair heiress hiding out in small town? Is this the man who stole Ava's heart? From runway to ranch house, inside Ava Sinclair's escape from the spotlight. Ava found out when her phone, finally turned on in a panicked haze, buzzed with dozens of missed calls. From Sienna, from her mother, from numbers she didn't recognize. Even the PR firm had sent a pre-written statement she hadn't approved, spinning the story into something she didn't recognize. The internet called it romantic, raw, brave. To Ava, it felt like exposure, again, and the ripple hit Alder Creek just as fast. The next day, people whispered at the gas station. Strangers showed up at the brew barn, just passing through with phones in their hands and two curious smiles. The quiet hum of small-town life had been replaced with an undercurrent of speculation and watchful eyes. Daniel barely spoke that night. He made dinner like always, helped Emily with her reading, but the weight in his shoulders said everything. He didn't blame her, not out loud. But she saw it in the way he didn't quite meet her gaze, because now his daughter was in headlines. His home was no longer his own, and the line between Ava Sinclair and Ava Collins had been torn in half for all the world to see. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Outside, snow fell in gentle, whispering sheets, coating the pines and the gravel road that led back to Alder Creek. Inside, Ava sat at the small wooden table, the invitation to the Sinclair Winter Gala lying open beside her untouched tea, and her phone vibrating silently with a new message from her mother every few minutes. She'd stopped reading them. One, though, stuck in her mind. The board expects your attendance. This is not optional. Optional. The word felt like a cruel joke. In New York, everything waited. The empire, the cameras, the legacy that had been carefully built, brick by brick, in her name. They wanted her return, not as a person, but as a symbol, polished, poised, repaired. But that life, that version of Ava, had never felt like hers. Here she'd begun to feel something different, something real. Mornings with Emily curled under a blanket, sleepy-eyed and giggling. Quiet dinners, helping Daniel fix brakes in the garage, while music played low in the background and the world stopped demanding so much of her. And yet, the town was changing because of her. Daniel's name had surfaced in celebrity blogs. Emily's photo had been posted and reposted. Paparazzi parked on Main Street like they belonged there, and Ava hated it. Hated what her presence had done to their quiet life. She stood, moving to the window, her arms wrapped tight around her chest. Below, the driveway curved through the trees, still untouched by tire tracks. Daniel hadn't come by in days. Was he waiting for her decision, or already assuming what it would be? She didn't blame him either way. She could return, slide back into the satin gowns and sterile boardrooms, smile for cameras, pretend the mountain air had been just a break. Or she could fight for the fragile, beautiful thing she'd found here. Not fame, not escape, belonging. She stared at her reflection in the window, the woman in the glass caught between two worlds, and for once, Ava Sinclair didn't want to be expected. She wanted to choose. The boardroom was everything Ava remembered. Gleaming glass, sharp corners, cold air conditioned to the point of discomfort. The city's skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like a glittering threat. Around the long obsidian table sat a dozen faces she'd known since childhood, advisors, shareholders, allies of her mother who smiled like sharks. At the head, Celeste Sinclair sat in her tailored navy suit, back straight, hands folded neatly on the table like she already knew the ending to this story. "You've made quite the return," her mother said, voice clipped and polished. "I assume the media spectacle was intentional?" Ava took a slow breath and placed both palms on the table, steady. "No, but it told me everything I needed to know." Celeste arched a brow. "To enlighten us?" Ava's gaze swept the room. "For years, I've let this company shape me. You shaped me. My life has been curated, controlled, down to the last photo op and social caption. I was the brand before I was even a person." "And you were compensated for that quite well," a board member murmured. "I didn't come here for money," Ava said, her voice firm. "I came because something has to change. And if it doesn't, I'm done. I'll walk away from all of it." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Celeste leaned forward. "You'd throw this away? Your future? Your name?" "My name is the only thing I haven't owned," Ava replied. "Until now." She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside, a restructuring proposal. A new direction for Sinclair Fashion, ethical sourcing, scaled-down press exposure, community programs, mentorships for young designers who didn't come from dynasty bloodlines, not just image. Substance. "You step down," Ava said, looking her mother in the eye. "I take full creative and executive control. No more being your puppet. No more playing the perfect heir." Celeste stared at her, the facade flickering for just a moment. Then came the quiet reply. "You've grown teeth." "No," Ava said. "I've grown a spine." Whether they backed her or not, she knew this was the moment her life stopped being inherited and started being her own. The house was too quiet. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the worn wood, a mug of coffee gone cold between his hands. The radio hummed low in the background, some old country ballad about lost love and second chances, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the spot across from him, the one where Ava used to sit, where she'd laughed at Emily's jokes, where she'd told him, just once, that being here made her feel real. Now that chair sat empty, and the space around it felt hollow. He told himself it was for the best, that her world had come calling, and she'd answered, just like he knew she would. He'd built a life around expecting people to leave, not because they didn't care, but because people like Ava didn't stay in places like this. Still, it didn't stop him from looking at the road every time a car passed by, or from noticing the faint scent of her shampoo still lingering in the towel she used that last night. He tried to push her out of his head, tried to fill the space with repairs and invoices and Emily's bedtime stories. But some absences refused to be ignored. "Dad?" Emily's voice came from the hallway, quiet, unsure. She padded into the room in her socks, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one floppy ear. "Is Ava coming back?" Daniel looked up slowly, blinking like he'd just come out of a dream. "I don't know, Em." Emily climbed into the chair beside him, curling her legs beneath her. "I miss her." "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Me too." There was a long pause. Then Emily rested her head on his arm. "Maybe she just had to go fix something, like you do. You always say things break sometimes, but that doesn't mean they're gone forever." Daniel smiled faintly, the ache in his chest sharp and stubborn. "I guess we'll see." Outside, the wind swept across the yard, lifting snow into soft spirals. The world moved on. But Daniel wasn't ready to, not yet. The gymnasium buzzed with excitement, the kind of energy only a room full of proud parents and sugar-high kids could generate. Folding chairs lined the hardwood floor, creaking beneath winter coats and bundled-up neighbors. Handmade snowflakes dangled from the rafters, glittering under the dim stage lights. Daniel sat in the second row, his flannel shirt tucked into clean jeans, hair combed in a way Emily had insisted on. He glanced at the program in his hand for the 10th time. Alder Creek Elementary presents A Winter's Tale. Emily was playing a snowflake, one of 20 to be exact. She'd been rehearsing her one line for 2 weeks, practicing in the living room with dramatic flair and way too much glitter. He smiled at the thought, but something in his chest felt hollow. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the play began. Cardboard trees, 2 loud microphones, and proud, waving kids. Emily stood in the back row, scanning the crowd until her eyes found Daniel. She waved with both hands, her grin wide and unmistakable. Then the back door creaked open. Daniel glanced back, more out of habit than interest, and froze. Ava stood just inside the doorway, her coat dusted with snow, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked slightly out of breath, like she'd run the last few steps just to make it on time. He blinked, certain he was imagining her, but she moved down the aisle, quietly, carefully, and slid into the empty seat beside him without a word. Neither of them spoke, but Ava looked forward, her eyes fixed on the stage like it was the only thing anchoring her. Daniel noticed her hands, clenched tightly in her lap, the way her shoulders trembled just slightly before she steadied herself. When Emily spotted her, her eyes went wide. Her little gasp of joy was audible from the stage. She waved even harder now, proud and beaming, as if the whole performance had always been for this moment. Ava smiled, and beside her, Daniel felt the edges of his guarded heart begin to shift. She came back, not with words, but with presence. And for now, that was more than enough. The play was over. Children raced through the aisles in a blur of scarves and construction paper crowns, their laughter echoing off the gymnasium walls. Parents gathered coats and snapped photos, the chaos comforting in its familiarity. But Daniel sat still in his seat, eyes forward, hands loosely clasped between his knees. Ava hadn't moved either. They'd watched the entire show in silence, side by side, their shoulders nearly touching, but with a gulf of questions between them. Now the crowd was thinning. Emily had run off with friends to find hot cocoa in the cafeteria. It was just them, and the space between everything said and unsaid. Ava turned toward him slowly, her expression unreadable at first. Then came the quiet, trembling honesty that lived behind her carefully measured breaths. "I didn't leave because I was afraid of this," she said softly, eyes locking onto his. "I left because I thought I'd already broken it." Daniel looked at her, guarded, but listening. "I wasn't ready for what you gave me," she continued. "Not the dinners, not the quiet, not Emily's questions or your steadiness. I've never had that. Not without strings, not without a spotlight waiting to ruin it." She paused, her voice trembling. "When the cameras showed up, I thought, this is where it ends. This is where I ruin something good again." He didn't speak, but the stiffness in his jaw eased slightly. "I went back to New York to take back control of my life," she said. "I faced the board, my mother. I told them I wasn't playing their game anymore. I didn't want to be their symbol. I wanted to be someone real, someone honest. And it wasn't until I walked out of that building that I realized something." Daniel raised an eyebrow, quietly bracing himself. Ava leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "None of it meant anything if I couldn't share it with you." A long silence followed, heavy, full. "You said once that trust is earned," she added. "I'm not here to ask for all of it back. I'm just here to start over, if you'll let me." Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he reached over and took her hand. The porch creaked under their feet as Daniel handed Ava a steaming mug of coffee, the early morning sun stretching pale gold across the snow-covered fields. The air was crisp, the kind that stung your lungs before settling into your chest. Ava pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and leaned into the silence between them, comfortable now, not strained. Emily was still asleep inside, wrapped in flannel sheets and dreams of glittery snowflakes and curtain calls. The house was quiet, except for the low whistle of the wind brushing against the windows. Daniel sat beside Ava on the steps, elbows resting on his knees, coffee in hand. "You sure about this?" he asked, not sharply, just gently. A quiet invitation to speak her truth again. Ava nodded, her eyes following a bird darting across the white sky. "I've never been more sure, but I want to do it differently this time." He glanced over, waiting. "I don't want the chaos," she said. "No press tours, no showrooms on Fifth Avenue. I want something slower, something that matters." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She smiled, small but certain. "I want to design a line inspired by this place, by the people here, clothes that are lived in, that feel like warm kitchens and old garages and tiny school plays." She paused, looking at him. "By people like you." Daniel looked away, a faint flush creeping into his face. "You're going to make flannel shirts the next big thing?" "I might," she teased, "but only yours." He laughed, a sound that felt like the soft breaking of old walls. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She sipped her coffee. "I want to build something with my own hands, something that doesn't belong to my mother's empire, something that starts right here." Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze resting on the horizon. "We take it one step at a time, all right? No headlines, no rushing." Ava leaned her head against his shoulder, the blanket tucked around both of them now. One step at a time. And as the sun climbed higher and the snow sparkled around them, the past felt a little less heavy. The future, a little more theirs. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil, two scents that shouldn't have gone together but somehow did. Daniel stood on a ladder, hammer in hand, securing the last piece of reclaimed wood to the wall of what used to be his tool storage corner. Now it was becoming something entirely different. Ava's studio. Not a showroom, not a corporate office, just a space with light texture and heart. Ava knelt beside a folding table nearby, sorting swatches of fabric into neat piles, soft flannels, durable canvas, cozy knits in muted tones inspired by Alder Creek itself. The names she'd given the colors were small-town poetry, snowbank, pine shadow, bonfire, morning fog. Emily ran between them with her notebook, sketching her own collection beside Ava's, offering commentary on everything. "This one's good for twirling," she said, holding up a swatch, "and this one looks like pancakes." Daniel chuckled from the ladder. "That's high praise around here." Ava smiled, brushing her hair behind her ear, smudged with chalk from where she'd been marking fabric. "She's got a better eye than most people on 7th Avenue. The space was modest. Half the garage still held Daniel's tools and Emily's bike, but the other half had transformed. A long work table, sewing machines Ava had hauled up from the city, and a corkboard already pinned with sketches, fabric samples, and a few snapshots of the town, the diner sign at dusk, Emily holding a snow globe, Daniel in the garage, sleeves rolled up and smiling without knowing. They worked in sync, Daniel cutting wood and hanging lights, while Ava arranged racks and carefully labeled bins. There was no friction, no tug of war, just motion, just building something side by side. Later, when the overhead lights flickered on and cast a warm glow over the newly carved space, Ava stood in the center, turning slowly to take it in. "It's not what I'm used to," she said quietly, "but it feels more like mine than anything ever has." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, watching her with something like pride. "That's the point, right?" She nodded, then crossed the space to him, slipping her hand into his like she'd always known the way. The garage and the runway had finally found common ground, and they'd built it together. The sun had dipped behind the pines, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. Inside, the cabin was warm, filled with the scent of baked apples and firewood. Ava sat curled on the couch, a soft throw around her shoulders, listening to the gentle hum of Daniel and Emily in the kitchen. She'd spent the day sketching by the big front window, pencil smudges on her wrist, fabric samples strewn like fallen leaves around the room. It had been a quiet day, the kind that settled deep into your bones. Emily came padding into the living room, socks slipping slightly on the wood floor. "Ava," she said, gripping something behind her back, "I made you something." Ava smiled and sat up straighter. "Yeah? Let's see it." Emily pulled the paper from behind her with a dramatic flair only a 7-year-old could manage. Ta-da! It was a drawing, crayon and marker, bold and colorful. 3 stick figures stood side by side, one with long brown hair, one taller in flannel and jeans, and a smaller one in a purple dress. Above them, Emily had scrawled, in uneven but determined handwriting, "Our new family." Ava stared at it, heart thudding quietly. There was a big yellow sun in the corner and a lopsided heart floating above the 3 of them. In the background, a house, a garage, and what appeared to be a giant plate of spaghetti. Clearly, Emily's artistic homage to their first dinner together. Ava's eyes burned. "You like it?" Emily asked, bouncing on her toes. "That's you, and that's Dad, and that's me in my snowflake costume." Ava nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She reached out, gently touching the edge of the paper like it might crumble under the weight of what it meant. "It's beautiful, Emily." Daniel stood in the doorway, quiet, watching them. Ava looked up at him, blinking quickly, and he just nodded. No words were needed, because in that crayon-colored world, drawn by the hands of a child who saw things clearly before the adults ever could, everything made sense. This was home. This was family. The snow had long since melted, giving way to soft earth and budding green. Alder Creek was stretching out of winter's long shadow, waking with the smell of rain-soaked wood and wildflowers blooming along fence lines. The air was warmer now, but still carried the faint chill of memory, just enough to make you appreciate the sun when it finally came. Underneath the old oak tree near the bend in the road, their tree, white lights were strung from branch to branch, glowing like captured stars in the dusk. A makeshift runway stretched out across the grass, flanked by folding chairs and picnic blankets. Kids ran barefoot between rows, and a bluegrass band strummed soft chords from a corner stage built out of hay bales and old lumber. It was Ava's idea. Not a fashion show, not exactly. More like a celebration of something real. Her new line, stitched from simplicity, inspired by the people who wore their stories on their sleeves, debuted not in Manhattan, but here in Alder Creek, beneath this tree, on a night filled with laughter and lemonade and unpolished charm. Emily strutted across the grass in a twirl-friendly dress called the Snowflake, her arms raised like she owned the world. The crowd clapped. Ava laughed through a hand over her mouth, eyes bright with disbelief and joy. Daniel stood beside her, quiet pride radiating from him like warmth. When the music slowed and the crowd's attention shifted to the next act, he leaned in. "Walk with me?" Ava nodded, and they stepped away from the lights and into the hush beneath the branches. The same tree where, months ago, a flat tire and a flannel jacket had changed the course of everything. Daniel turned to face her. No grand gestures, no audience. Just them. "I never thought I'd get a second shot at this," he said. "At love. At a real life." "You built one long before I showed up," Ava replied. "Maybe," he said, pulling something from his coat pocket. "A small velvet box. Simple, honest, real. But I don't want to keep building it without you." He opened it. Inside, a modest ring, a single diamond set in brushed silver. Ava's breath caught. She didn't need time. She didn't need to think. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes shining. 1,000 times yes. The crowd in the distance cheered as another model walked. But under the oak tree, where promises meant more than headlines, Daniel pulled Ava into his arms and kissed her as the lights twinkled overhead. And for the first time in their lives, love was entirely, beautifully unbranded.